Druidry is a spiritual tradition that has a very interesting history, and it's connected to this land, particularly to the land of the British Isles and France. But like every spiritual tradition, it has an origin in space, and then it gradually spreads around the world. So there's actually people following the Druid tradition all over the world. But one of the characteristics of it is that it's a nature-based religion, or spiritual way, or philosophy, or approach. That isn't dogmatic, and with revealed religions where a body of teaching is revealed to one person, they tend to become prescriptive and dogmatic, whereas nature spiritualities like Druidry tend to just evolve over time, and there isn't one single person who is the source of revelation. And a lot of people are attracted to Druidry now because they sense that we're at a time of crisis, and that somehow we've neglected the earth, and that we need to get back in touch with the natural world. And Druidry and spiritualities like Druidry can help us do this. And one of the things I think that Druidry teaches is that, of course, it's great to think globally and to be aware of what's happening all over the world, but also it's important to be in touch with one's locality. And it's so easy for us to feel that what we need is somehow far away from us. But in fact, Britain is covered in sacred sites. There are all sorts of wonderful places, and here we are in Sussex, near the Long Man, and there are lots of sacred sites around Sussex. So, I discovered this when I came to London when I was from London when I was about 35, and couldn't connect with the land for a while, but then started to walk in the landscape and discovered the Long Man and discovered the sacred mound in Lewes and so on, and discovered that there were all these wonderful treasures, really, and that one simply had to walk in the land and experience it and tune in, if you like, and it was there. I didn't have to go to Tibet or even to Glastonbury. It was there on my doorstep. So one of the ideas that comes up when people hear about Druids is they say, well, the Druids existed thousands of years ago, now you can't be a Druid now. But the point is that the Druid tradition, there was a period of about 1,000 years. There was the pre-Druidic world, if you like, the sort of shamanistic, probably earth goddess-centered sort of spirituality of the various tribes in these lands that gradually coalesced into a kind of body of religious practice, which was what you might call classical Druidry, that occurred, say, from 500 BC through to about 500 AD, so it's about 1,000 years. And then with the coming of Christianity, it went underground and went into folklore and tradition and so on. And then in the 17th century, there was a period which was called the Druid Revival, where scholars started to become interested in Druidry again and became interested in the fact that their ancestors weren't grunting savages, but actually had this wonderful sort of spiritual tradition. And so the history of Druidry carries on there until you come to the present day, where since the sort of 1980s there's been a tremendous revival of interest. And so when you talk about being a Druid or following the Druid way, you're talking about a tradition that has a history of, certainly from the revival period, of about 200 years, something like that, which is in itself a tradition. But that has roots in a heritage that is much older. Now, it's true that it doesn't have the same continuity as, say, certain Australian and Aboriginal traditions or Native American traditions, which is actually a continuous line of inherited law that is passed from one tribe to one generation to another through a tribe. But what is true is that we do have a tradition that is rooted in a heritage. And there's all sorts of information that we can find out about that more and more. So there's a whole lot of, for instance, sacred animal law. About 13 years ago, I published, together with my wife Stephanie, a book called The Druid Animal Oracle, where we looked at all the old native animal law that existed in Britain. And then just this winter we're coming out with the Druid Plant Oracle, which deals with all the herbal law that can be found in these lands as well. And it is actually there. One of the greatest sort of things I've found is that it hasn't been lost. Most people will think that it's actually been lost, and they'll say, oh, well, you've just got a few lines in Caesar or something like that. It's actually not true. There's all sorts of clues that you can pick up on. And the difference is, though, that what happens is you have a bunch of information that is at your disposal to use creatively in the modern world. So you're not trying to sort of reenact something that's ancient and try and pretend or be a druid as they were in the past. Instead, you've got a whole bunch of ingredients, sacred law about animals, sacred law about plants, sacred lore about the festivals and the equinoxes and the solstices and so on, that you can put together to follow a spiritual way that is very much in the here and now. So the difference becomes from, instead of being in the restaurant, you're in the kitchen. So instead of Druidry being a ready-made spirituality that you practice sort of every Sunday morning or whatever, you're in the kitchen. It's not ready-made. It's all there. The ingredients are there, and it's up to you to fashion for yourself and for your family. So you become part of the tradition. You become part of Druidry. My experience of Druidry started when I was a child. My father knew the old chief Druid in London, and he introduced me to him. And this was sort of something, quite extraordinary, really, a chief Druid in London, and who was this, and so on. But I fell in love with this whole idea that the land was covered in sacred sites, and there were stone circles, and there was this ancient tradition, and there was Ogham, the old tree lore of the Druids, and so on. And it was very inspiring to me. And so I studied with him. And then he died, and I went through all sorts of experiences and so on. And the order of Druids that he ran and that I was initiated into on Glastonbury tour about 35 years ago, I was asked to lead it. And so for the last 19 years I've been leading that order. And what's happened since the late 1980s is that the interest in it has sort of grown exponentially. So now we have about 10,000 members. And we put on 4 camps a year, camps like this, for members and their families and friends. And we're going to start doing camps for the public as well, and hopefully. And also we have big gatherings at Glastonbury. We have camps in New Zealand and in America, and so on. So there's a lot of interest, and we have a sort of training program. So we have a website, which is druidry.org. So it's druidry.org. And there we've got a message board, and there are thousands of people on the message board with all sorts of forums and so on, and all sorts of events. And we have a training program, and because Druidry was initially an oral tradition in the old days, and so we've revived that concept. And so we do a training program that's on CDs, and it gets sent out to people. It's also in printed material as well, and we send it out all over the world, and we have people travel through various experiences through that distance learning program.